The category is What the Trans, darling?
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to a spooky What the Trans.
Yes. Welcome to this at least slightly special edition of the show because it's just that time of year, I'm afraid. So we've been doing a bit of research, which we will bring to you a little while later as part of the meet. But we'll be doing our usual getting annoyed about the news thing first. But even firster, how are you, Michelle?
I am a little bit under the weather, which was not great as I was getting a couple of interviews sorted out. But
Indeed.
Thankfully, our wonderful researcher Sophie came in at the very last minute and we threw her right in the deep end. And, well, you lovely listeners will hear the amazing work she did. She is astonishingly good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll definitely come back to that, but yeah, absolutely. So, Sophie, I'm sure you're listening, but nicely done.
Oh, how are you doing?
Oh, me? Yes, that's right. I'm here as well, aren't I? Yes, I am okay. Obviously, still rather unemployed. Getting really, really sick of pasta, as you might imagine.
Oh yeah, I've been on the pasta diet for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can do with it.
Yeah, indeed. And, you know, as much as I enjoy pesto as well, it's like you just get bored, don't you? But other than that, fine. Everybody seems to be ill. Including you, including my girlfriend, and, you know, various other people that I know around here. And it's like, again, time of year for that, I suppose. But going around to all my friends' houses with, like, okay, so there's chamomile tea for you, and I brought you some Lemsip, and there's some Strepsils for you, and it's, you know, it's good.
I am thoroughly full of legal over-the-counter pain medication. But if any listeners out there have any access to any illegal under-the-bridge pain medication, please let me know. I'm willing to try almost anything at this point.
Yeah, that's fair, but also I'm really not sure we should be encouraging people to offer us illegal services. It's, you know, that's the sort of thing that people could get very, very upset about.
Fair enough. Absolutely do not offer us drugs, except absolutely do.
I think it's honestly, this isn't as bad as that time where we said, hey, if you know where to get some hallucinogenics, tell us on Twitter.
We did that, didn't we?
We did do that, yes. And but then no one offered. I mean, honestly, what's the world coming to?
I know, right? When you can't get any decent drugs from the queer scene, then the world is coming to an end.
Something's gone drastically wrong. So I think we should crack on. What do you say?
Yeah, let's crack on with this news thing that we do.
So I'm pretty sure I know what's first, but what's first?
There is a new anti-trans group in town who are calling themselves the LGB Alliance. You will probably have heard about this lot because they have been widely reported in the right-wing press, including our old friends The Times and The Telegraph. They have received all of this free press in spite of the fact that they have only had one meeting, and the only observable parts of the organisation that have been established so far are a Twitter account and a Facebook page, which puts them on about the same level organisation-wise as this podcast that you're listening to that we are recording in our bedrooms. So where the hell is our gushing coverage? Where is the love, guys?
Yeah.
We're just as established and official as this LGB Alliance are. But this new group has been founded by several of the usual suspects from the anti-trans scene, and among their members include Simon Fanshawe, one of the original 14 founders of Stonewall. As such, because they have a Stonewall founder in the fold, as well as a couple of former trustees, the right-wing press has reported on their formation as a giant cataclysmic split inside Stonewall and the LGBT community in general, in spite of the fact that this group has been widely rejected by the majority of the LGBT community, but more on that later. For now, we should go into what this group claimed to be about, but we don't want to spend too long on discussing the ins and outs of this lot because, to be honest, we don't want to give them any more time than we absolutely need to. The group claimed to be an LGBT rights group on the surface and campaigned for lesbian, gay and bisexual people, and if this was actually the case, then this would be fine. If they were meeting up to discuss the ongoing struggle to make PrEP available throughout the UK, or on how hate crimes against LGBT people have been rising over the last couple of years, or how gay and bisexual women face barriers when accessing healthcare, This would be a perfectly reasonable group to exist as long as they allowed LGBT, trans, and non-binary people to contribute on an equal level and did not spend their time spouting transphobic horseshit. Unfortunately, this new group operate under the assumption that being transphobic shit nuggets is the same as fighting for LGBT equality. So far, they have not offered any positions, goals, or principles that are commonly understood to be issues that LGBT people face. Instead, they have claimed that Stonewall, the UK-based advocacy charity that begun campaigning on trans issues in 2015, have failed LGBT people because of their inclusion of trans people. Trans issues are at the very core of every statement the LGBT Alliance has put out there, where various people involved in the group have claimed that quote-unquote trans ideology is misogynistic and homophobic because apparently the trans community is trying to get gay men to sleep with trans men and lesbians to sleep with trans women. They are basically every anti-trans Twitter account you have ever come across with added pomposity and delusions of grandeur. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a US-based non-profit legal advocacy group and has gained a reputation in the United States for its work in identifying hate groups and campaigning against hatred aimed at many different minority groups. Their definition of a hate group is, and I quote from them themselves here, a group that has beliefs or practices that attack or malign an entire class of people, typically for their immutable characteristics. Based on the fact that the entire founding principles of the LGBT Alliance are based solely on fighting trans equality and have formed to oppose Stonewall for their trans inclusion, we feel that the LGBT Alliance absolutely fits the Southern Poverty Law Center's definition of a hate group. Now, it has been widely reported in the press that as one of LGBT Alliance's founders is also a founder of Stonewall, this represents a massive split in both Stonewall and the LGBT community. So is this the case? Has there been a split in Stonewall? Does this represent a fracturing of the community? Are they dividing up their possessions and going to court over who gets the kids? Stonewall says no. In a rather blunt and to the point statement, Paul Toocock, Stonewall's interim CEO, said, "There is no truth to reports of Stonewall splitting, so please ignore the alarmist headlines. These stories don't refer to any current Stonewall staff or trustees. There is no equality for lesbian, gay and bi people without equality for trans people. We're all united in our mission to achieving acceptance without exception for all LGBT people." So Ashley, did you see any of this discourse whilst you were busy off researching Halloween stuff?
Obviously I did, yes. It was a bit difficult to avoid it, wasn't it? And there were some people spilling into our Twitter mentions saying, why are you following these guys? They're transphobic. And we're like, yeah, we know, all right? It's called research.
And it turned out we weren't even following the right one. We were following one of the parody accounts.
Parody accounts.
I thought that we were following the right one, but...
That was quite amusing because I did see several parody accounts just springing up, which was hilarious. Obviously, if they're going to use misdirection and misinformation, then yeah, fine, so shall we. I also did have a bit of a cheap laugh over the fact that they're called the LGBT Alliance, because then I thought, well, does that make us the trans horde?
Is that a World of Warcraft reference?
It is, yeah, and even though I have never played World of Warcraft, I'm just trying to reference something that's popular. Yeah, I know that they're called the Horde, but then it could have been, what, are they the Rebel Alliance and we're the evil trans empire?
Oh, I like that.
I don't know, I'm not sure the optics of that are the best. Anyway, moving on to the actual story.
Yeah.
It's super disappointing, but also it's like, oh, another one? Really? Good heavens. And they've got like the same sort of collection of Twitter followers that the Brexit party and the far right generally do, which kind of tells you what you need to know. The discourse surrounding it also seemed to show that the majority of the people following and tweeting and supporting the account were actually cis and indeed straight people who were tweeting, oh, well, I'm not gay, but I absolutely support this. And it's like, basically you're saying that you're a transphobe then.
Yeah, they found a homosexual advocacy that fit their transphobia like a glove, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But then it's the same as you said in the sort of reading out the segment, it is literally the same stuff, right? A new anti-trans group with all of the same talking points as all of the other ones, of which there are many. And again, I'm asking the question, where do these people get their money from?
Well, at the moment, they on the real account's Twitter, they said that they were trying to do a GoFundMe for £25,000 to get office space, but then GoFundMe has cancelled it because they got so many complaints. Because it's not like they keep saying like, oh, we're not a hate group, but it's like, and they keep claiming, oh, we are about LGBT issues, and it's like, well, you haven't talked about a single one yet that isn't at the very least a backdoor way or just outright transphobia, you know?
Yeah, and that's been so obvious just looking at their social media. They haven't done anything about any of the issues that you mentioned earlier on or anything else, or, you know, about people being deported back to countries where if they're LGBT, they will be killed. They haven't done anything about like access in terms of abortion. They haven't done anything about LGBT aging. They haven't made statements on any of these real, valid, actual issues. They are simply focused on bashing trans people. It was interesting to note as well that one of the founders of the organisation who kind of put out the first tweet that said, hey, we're launching this thing, was attached to Garden Court Chambers, a barrister's chambers, who... Garden Court Chambers were one of the founding members of the Trans Equality Legal Initiative when that launched back in 2016. So, you know, trouble at mill kind of thing. But then Garden Court Chambers went it took them a couple of days, but then, you know, they distanced themselves quite significantly from that rhetoric by saying, we absolutely do not support this.
Which is good on them. And then I saw the thing where that particular person, like, went to the press saying that she was being silenced by the trans lobby when it was like, no, your employers just think that your extracurricular activities look bad on them.
In much the same way that if you were working at a fast food restaurant but were also organising like fascist action kind of thing, like literally Nazi organising, the fast food restaurant might well think, well, no, you are not the sort of person that we want to employ, actually. You know, but employers do have the right to, well, rightly or wrongly, but employers do seem to think they have the right to regulate on what their employees do in their spare time. For the most part, this is not an issue. It's like, you know, no, if you work here, you cannot possibly join a football team. That's not allowed. Whereas if it's something that's actually going to affect the public perception of the organisation, because it directly contradicts some of the organisation's work in terms of equality, then absolutely they have the right to say, no, that's not appropriate, you know, wind your neck in and maybe go find somewhere else to work.
She hasn't been fired or anything, right? Like, it was just like a public statement.
It was indeed. Not that I'm aware of, but I am sure there are things happening that we are not seeing. So we shall see how that goes. But the point is, this was dressed up and trumped up to be a huge split in Stonewall, absolute cataclysm, and it so isn't. It totally isn't. Which Stonewall themselves have quite emphatically said in a couple of different statements. So, to get a fuller picture of this particular situation, we spoke to two people who also co-founded Stonewall along with Simon Fanshawe to get their take on things. Now, first up, our researcher and roving reporter Sophie Lewis talked to Lisa Power about what she thinks of all of this. So take it away, Sophie and Lisa in the past.
Hello, Lisa. Thank you for joining us. What is your take on the new LGB alliance?
I think my take is that I'm not entirely surprised because the same group of people have been wandering around for the last year trying to get a foothold on the public imagination and the public debate. But I'm genuinely surprised by the way in which people within that, for whom I had some respect, despite their views on trans issues, have been willing to let the far-right press use them in order to get at trans people. They're people who I would have expected to know better than to let the right wing use us in any way. And indeed, I'm quite astounded that people are prepared to promulgate fake news about there being a split within Stonewall. There's no split within Stonewall. As far as I can see, it's going on its merry way, doing an awful lot of good for an awful lot of people. All there is one of the founders and a few other people of my generation, largely, who disagree with the way that the movement has changed since they were running it.
Do you think there is a major split in the LGBT community?
Oh, I think there are hundreds of splits in the LGBT community because it's not a single community. But there isn't a split within Stonewall. And I don't see, frankly, most of the people that I know within LGBT activism or indeed LGBT life who accept this kind of hate speech against trans people. I mean, there are a lot of people who are ignorant of the issues, but talking to people, that there is no, all this. I don't think there's a major split in the LGBT community. I think there are a number of people, mainly from my generation, but with a few younger people that they've picked up along the way, who are really annoyed that the movement doesn't belong to them anymore and that the rules that we lived by in the 80s with really strict demarcations are all going by the board. And now there is a movement which has lesbians, gay men, bisexual people, trans people, intersex people, asexual people, all kinds of queer people. And I think that's delightful. I think it's really good. And I think that young people now are actually able to find out who they are for themselves in having to, they no longer have to go from one straitjacket of being straight into another straitjacket of being gay. They can explore for themselves what they are and accept quite often that their life may be fluid over time.
That's a really nice way of putting it.
I think it's a much kinder movement than we had in the 80s, where when you stopped being straight, you'd better be the right kind of lesbian or gay. Bi people didn't get a good time. And as you can see from the way that some of the people who founded this new group, they still have complete contempt for bi people. I don't think that kind of contempt for anyone who's trying to find out who they truly are and live a life where they can be honest with themselves and others is ever warranted.
Stonewall has done amazing things for LGBT people over the years. Why did you help to found Stonewall?
Well, I helped found Stonewall because I was absolutely furious about the complete cock-up that we've made of resisting Section 28. And we made a cock-up of resisting Section 28 because we didn't take the threat from the right seriously, because we wouldn't negotiate with and talk to the people who were our apparent enemies. But more importantly, what we didn't do was talk to the people in the middle who could have been our allies. But because we disagreed with them about some things, we didn't bother to talk to them about anything. And I think the point of Stonewall, very much then and now, was that it was the widest possible perspective on, at that point, lesbian and gay, and now LGBT plus issues. And I think it's really good that Stonewall has changed and grown over the last, 30 years? When we founded it, we had no clue what we were doing. And I think that, we were lucky. We were the right thing at the right time. We were also very driven. All of us put aside our differences because we recognized that there was an enemy that was much bigger than the things that divided us. I mean, I'd never spent time with gay conservatives before. I'd never had a gay police officer in my house before. I came very much from the radical activist perspective, but there were other people in there who came from very different perspectives. And we had some profound disagreements, but the bottom line was equality and human rights for all. And I'm really glad that Stonewall is still sticking to that after all these years. Equality and human rights for all.
With you mentioned the Section 28. Do you think there are any similarities to what LGBT people faced when you founded Stonewall and what trans people are facing today?
Oh my God, the echoes are massive. I mean, it's even the same accusations. The accusation that somehow we were grooming children is echoed in the accusations about children being tranced, in inverted commas, these days. The accusation that somehow we were forcing people into homosexuality goes along with the accusation that somehow trans women are forcing other women to have relationships with them, which is just such nonsense. And in a way, I mean, there's even a focus where in the 80s, it was gay men who were the horrors. I mean, lesbians were a bit of a joke. And that's echoed by the way that trans women are seen as a massive enemy, and trans men are somehow just dismissed as butch lesbians who've lost their way, which I think is the most patronising thing possible. I mean, we're supposed to be all about ensuring that people are able to determine their lives for themselves as long as they're doing no harm to others. And what seems to me to be happening is that people are taking individual incidents where somebody has been out of order and turning that into a massive assumption about the whole community. And that's the basis of all forms of major prejudice. You don't blame all black people for something that one black person has done. You don't blame all lesbians for something that one lesbian has done. And you don't blame all trans people for something that one trans person has done. And if you do that, then you're showing your prejudice.
To summarise, in your view, is the rest of the LGBT community with trans people?
Well, I don't think the whole of the LGBT community is ever with anyone, including themselves, on a bad day. But I do think that there is a massive, massive groundswell. And again, there's a parallel here with Stonewall. Stonewall was founded because we believed, and we were right, that there were a huge number of quiet people who were not badge-wearing double denim activists like I was, who just wanted a decent life for everybody. And we bet on that, and we were right. And that's what I find with most of the LGBT community now. There are people who might say something in ignorance because they've picked up on talking points they've seen on Twitter, or, they've been sold a pup about some story. But by and large, I go to a lot of prides, I go to a lot of different things, and most people are absolutely fine. And, their attitude is that, of course, trans people are part of the same movement. The thing is, we're not all the same. We are all different. Lesbians are different to gay men. Trans people are different. But I think what people forget is that when people want to persecute us, they're not going to make those divisions between us. When people want to persecute the queers, they're going to persecute all of us, and it's not going to matter what flavour of queer you are. And I think that's what makes me really angry about respectability politics sometimes, is that some of us are prepared to throw others of us out of the boat in order to be accepted by people who, frankly, I wouldn't give the time of day for, because I think, respectability politics can be very difficult. Most people just want a quiet life and to get on with their life. But you can do that without offering somebody else up as a sacrifice. And I think for me, that's a basic thing about this, is you don't achieve your rights by stepping on somebody else's.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Lisa. That was brilliant.
You're very welcome, and I wish you the very best of luck.
So I want to thank Sophie for doing the interview, because yesterday my voice was totally fucked. And
yeah, it wasn't there at all.
Yeah, we really threw her in the deep end on this particular assignment, and by God, she nailed it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Did really well. So again, Sophie, thank you. It's not actually an easy thing to do.
Yeah, because it was literally just like, I messaged him just like, so I got a Stonewall founder. I can't do the interview. Could you take this?
Yeah, good interview. Well done, Sophie, and thanks for doing that alongside us. But in terms of what Lisa Powers actually said there, I think she's made quite a lot of very, very good points, and I particularly enjoyed the part where she described herself as a badge-wearing double denim activist. I loved that. I want to be a badge-wearing double denim activist.
She's really funny. A while ago I watched on YouTube, she did a talk, and I think it was in Cardiff. I will dig out the link and put it in the description, because it is really good. Like, she talks all about how it found Stonewall, and like how her, Ian McKellen, the lady who played Pat Butcher in EastEnders, were just like round her kitchen table planning what Stonewall was going to be, and it's just fascinating stuff. But yeah, when it comes to what she said there, like, I mean, she calls it as she sees it, and she's not wrong. The LGBT community is fractured along many different lines, so many different lines, but overall, this just doesn't appear to be one of them. What the press have been saying does not translate to the reality of the LGBT community as she understands it and as I understand it.
Yeah, indeed. And it was interesting to hear her insight about Section 28. And, you know, Stonewall being founded in response to that, where they hadn't taken the threat from the right wing as seriously as they should have done. And, you know, and so Section 28 was in. And we could argue that that's another thing that we're sort of seeing again, and that we have to be wise to. But that's related to something else she said about people that she would expect to know better, who are essentially enabling the far right. Because, you know, we're all the enemy. As far as they're concerned, it's like, well, you know, lesbian and gay people are okay, but trans people, they're weird. It's like, actually, most of those people that are on that particular extreme end of the political spectrum would be just as interested in excluding LGB people from public life as doing so to the trans community, you know. And it's turkeys voting for Christmas, isn't it? It's like saying, oh, well, you know, I'm a gay man, but I hate trans people, so I will literally try and enable the Nazis and hope that that's all right, and hope that they don't eventually come for me. And it's like, well, that's unbearably naive.
Yeah, although I did read something that was being sent around that Simon Fanshawe wrote maybe 15 years ago for The Guardian, where he was arguing that gay people on the whole have achieved legal parity with straight people when it comes to rights. And he was writing this before same-sex marriage was a thing. And sort of tone policing what gay men should be doing and all of that. And it just stank of him. It stank of him being accepted into conventional society, and he was calling for the queer community to adapt to what, you know, the cis straight community demands or wants. Essentially, hide the aspects of gay culture from yourself. I mean, this is completely conjecture, but I can totally see his now hatred of trans people sort of stemming from that, in that he sees trans people going around doing the things that we do as a threat to his own acceptance. But again, we've not spoken to him. I did reach out for comment from this LGB Alliance. Didn't expect anything back, and to be honest, if they did, probably wouldn't have read it, because it probably would have been total fucking transphobic garbage. But I mean, that is my little pet theory based on the writing that he has done online and from the few snippets we've heard from him about the LGBT Alliance now.
It's respectability politics, isn't it? It's like, oh no, look at me, I'm normal. See, look, I just want to integrate into society. It's these nasty transes that are going too far. But you know, yeah, and it just pisses me off, and we see it all the time. You know, in the LGBT community, you know, those thousands of splits that Lisa Power mentioned. You know, we split on all sorts of things. We're not a monolith, right? We're not all literally the same person, cloned a number of times. Although, having said that, going into a couple of bars in the Village in Manchester, you'd be forgiven for thinking that was the case. So we also spoke to Duncan Campbell, didn't we?
Yeah, who has been an investigative journalist for many, many years, and he is another Stonewall founder who, it is safe to say, is also not chuffed at the claims that Stonewall has split. So here he is. Duncan Campbell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, good to speak to you.
So, what do you make of the LGB Alliance?
It's a complete piece of nonsense with a few people trying to stir up trouble with no backing at all. The principal person behind this did attempt to split Stonewall on this issue as part of an aggressive campaign against the Gender Recognition Act. That was a year ago. We saw it coming, and not a single person supported him. He made persistent attempts to wind up Stonewall, and they just stuck to their guns, which was really impressive.
Yeah. God bless Stonewall. So, in your opinion, is there a major split in the LGBT community when it comes to trans issues?
There's clearly some loud voices, which include people who are LGBT, making a lot of noise. The way that they're doing it is more familiar to me in the kind of journalism I do about deliberate stirring up of dissent by outsiders. And there's a very small number of supporters, but the sense of the split, when there was this attempt to create an issue for Stonewall, it was noticeable that not a single person turned up to support that initiative. Many of us went along to listen and heard very, very impressive account of how Stonewall's teams spent a year just, taking on the issues before they determined that there was no question that acceptance without exception applied to everybody. What I found quite appalling was the tenor of some of the comments. Took me straight back 30 years ago when we were trying to achieve much more basic things with no expectation of how far we'd get, and the kind of the way the hate speech would be framed. And it was just an echo of the same thing. So I have no knowledge of any sort of general split. I have no sense of any general split. Absolutely the opposite.
Yeah, that's the impression we've been getting from a lot of people all across the spectrum, that there's this small group that are saying that there's this big split, and I'm not really seeing that much evidence for it.
There's just no split at all. Well, let's call a spade a spade. Simon Fanshawe was one of the people who put his name to the original declaration to set up Stonewall with me. He is now completely out of line. His activities are repugnant to others who started that initiative, as I think you probably know, because you've spoken to some of them. And Stonewall itself is rock solid. And it was just pathetic to hear the arguments against trans, to which there were already answers brought out by this small group of noisemakers. So it's a fear campaign in which trans people are being targeted because they've got nowhere else to put their anger on this issue, and it's an unpleasantly modern thing. But if I was trans, I would really just turn off the noise button. They're not speaking for the rest of us.
Yeah, that's very much what we're going to be doing. So getting back, you're no longer involved in the daily running of Stonewall itself, but why did you help to found Stonewall? What was the impetus there?
Well, it's not the impetus. The lesbian and gay community, we were more narrow in our immediate perspectives then. Were under horrendous attack in America, in European countries, in the United Kingdom. There were steps to try and roll back on what had been achieved. The concept that we would be achieving real equality with anti-hate legislation wasn't even on our minds 30 years ago. And when this ridiculous law that Britain passed and had in force for most of these 30 years, came out, there were enough prominent out people to say, we have got to go to the barricades on this and start a long-term fight back. I mean, there were lots of courageous people out in the streets. There still are, and the new wave, which is absolutely in line with the same kind of principles, is Extinction Rebellion. We had to sort of start some of these things. And when you're starting a big, long-term political movement, you need not just the action on the streets and the thinkers and the universities and the politicians, but, long-term lobbying to change the culture, change people's minds, and pump the day to broker a new settlement with the establishment. And it was an idea which worked.
Is there any advice you could give to any trans activists out there?
Treat this nonsense alliance with the derision it deserves. It is a fake campaign. It finds its media allies in hate figures in journalism. They really don't count for anything. It's the same for being gay, being lesbian, whatever. It's visibility, being out, and that is what is going to change the perspective for the future. We live in fear sometimes. The same lobby techniques, the same vile influencing of media and putting out on social media has perfused our politics. But I feel confident that even in these dark situations, we are not going to roll back on LGBT equality for the reason that so many of us are out there. It's just the norm to have people in your family and your circle who are LGBT. And from point of view of trans, I would say, and it's slightly hard, and just give up and be there and be part of it. And that's the best insurance policy you can have. But in terms of what every LGBT organization is doing, the very conjugation of the initials tells you where we're all at. So I cannot say be not afraid, because there's always stuff to be afraid of, but I can certainly say look to the future in the way that you look to the past, and be confident that it will get better.
Are there any similarities to what LGBT people faced when you founded Stonewall and what trans people are facing today?
Yes, it's the same sort of unthinking prejudice based on not knowing people and wanting to put your fears somewhere. We overcame that for LGBT, and the same has now got to happen for trans people as well.
Duncan Campbell, thank you very much for all the work that you've done over the years, and thank you very much for talking to me today.
Take care, and you will be strong.
So yeah, I just would like to thank Thea, who came to us many months ago as a fan of the show, and she said that she works in pro audio stuff, and she was willing to help us out if we have any difficult audio, and yeah, she really cleaned up this audio good for us. So Thea, thank you so much. You are great and we love you.
Yes, we very much do. No, I listened to the original version first, and then the cleaned up version was like, oh wow, I can tell what he's saying now. Brilliant. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Thea. That was massively helpful once again.
So repugnant. That is accurate.
Good word. Don't hear that one often enough, actually.
I was extremely not surprised, but also kind of surprised at the same time at the fact that Simon Fanshawe has apparently been going around trying to get more people in the fold at Stonewall and Stonewall founders and stuff on the side of this for a while, it sounds like.
I see. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me, and yet at the same time, it totally does. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of like, it's like you hear about it, it's like, oh, wow, I'm surprised by that. But then you think about it for a second or two, and it's like, well, yeah, actually, that does make sense. But he's absolutely right when he says that it's, a small group of noisemakers with loud voices, isn't it? And it's the same ones, as I mentioned before. It's kind of the same people who are involved in so many of these different anti-trans groups, and I particularly enjoyed his suggestion that we treat them with the derision they deserve, which I suspect is where all the parody accounts are coming from. And, the final suggestion to be strong particularly resonated with me, but that's simply because I've been watching quite a lot of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power lately, and so...
Oh, it's so good, right?
Isn't it? It's so gay.
Good.
So gay.
I watched a few clips of the old She-Ra, and by today's standards, it's crap, it's garbage, it's unwatchable. The kids today, Ash, They don't know how good they got it.
Well, I mean, perhaps they might if they ever think, God, I wonder what the old version of She-Ra was like. You know. Anyway, going back to the interview that we were
let's
talking
talk about the interview, the important thing we did. I could definitely tell from that Duncan is not at all happy with what is being claimed in the media and with what this new LGB alliance is doing. And I think he's exactly right. The people in the fold seem to have forgotten what the struggle was in the past. Like, I mean, I'm only going to know academically because I was literally 5 years old when Stonewall founded.
Yeah.
But, you know, looking back, even I could tell that the times were incredibly homophobic.
Yeah.
To a point where, like, I still sometimes think back and I'm in disbelief as to how far things have come. And to see someone like Simon Fanshawe, like, join up with the same forces that were there trying to destroy his ability as a gay man to live his life, that is astonishing and proof that anyone is susceptible to succumbing to the wonderful, wonderful drug known as hate, because I do genuinely believe that hate-filled ideology can be very attractive to certain kinds of people at certain points in their lives, and none of us are immune. Any of us could succumb to a particular hateful hole because hating's easier. It's easier than understanding the world complexly. It's easier to assign all of the world's ill to one monstrous caricature and spend your life ranting about that and thinking that you are some kind of hero in a world gone mad. But it's an easy, lazy way out, and it may feel good, but it's just shitty. And there was my soapbox moment. Don't be a hater. Always do the work. Always read. Always open. Always think complexly.
I mean, that sounds a bit demanding, but you are right in that it does seem so attractive to a lot of people to literally scapegoat a community or a person. And we've seen it, you know, obviously trans people are far from the first and only victims of this particular impulse, but it's our turn at the moment, and that's no fun. However, I think I feel that demonstrates that, well, I think the pair of them were very emphatic about their opinions on this and about what Stonewall is and should represent and will continue to represent as it goes forward. And unfortunately, once again, it's been drummed up by the right-wing press into something that it absolutely isn't, in an attempt to stoke hatred and division because that makes them more money, essentially. Hooray for capitalism, yay!
There was our bi-weekly anti-capitalist segment. Thank you very much, Ashley.
No problem, yeah.
I think it's my turn next week.
Well, I think as we are contractually obliged by the evil scheming conspiracy that we are drawing our pay from, we are contractually obliged to mention anti-capitalism at least once per episode. So,
but yeah, the claims in the press clearly complete horseshit, and I would say if it seems like the Times and the Telegraph have said, like, the media narrative currency on this issue is, right, you have a Stonewall founder, whatever they do deserves mass coverage. So I'm going to put it out there to any Times and Telegraph journalists who are listening. We've got 100% more Stonewall founders involved in this episode of this show than LGB Alliance has. So where's our free press?
Although, having said that, if we're asking the Times and the Telegraph to give us a load of free press, that's probably not a good route to go down, because it will not be what we want. So
no, that's fair. That would not be fun. So yeah, let's keep this as a tiny podcast aimed exclusively at trans people.
Angry trans people.
Yeah, someone on Twitter actually referred to us as a cult podcast, and I like that.
Nice. What, as in, so we are a cult like Jonestown cult, or cult as in, you know, subculturals like a cult movie that everybody hated at the time but now everyone loves?
I like that we are sort of the trans community equivalent of Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I'd have gone with, like, The Thing or something, simply because I just didn't really enjoy Big Trouble in Little China, which I know makes me an absolute heretic as far as a lot of nerd culture is concerned. Anyway, I think we're getting slightly off the point of the story, so it's probably an idea to move on to the next one. But essentially, you've probably read about the LGB Alliance. It is once again trumped up fear-mongering by people that hate us. And obviously that much was obvious, but this is disappointing, but nothing has really changed.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything more to worry about with this group. Like, there's definitely was an impulse in my head. It was just like, oh no, these people have a wonderful PR angle. But then, this isn't that much different from the shit we've already got.
Pretty much. And as I've said, it's literally the same people. So, just so many sock puppets. Anyway.
Don't worry about it. Stonewall have our backs. Stonewall founders have our backs. It's going to be fine.
But moving on, and an update about the situation with the reform of the Gender Recognition Act. Yes, it's this again. And again, really sorry if you're listening to this from outside of the UK. In this never-ending saga, which first began back in 2014, and you could argue that it started even earlier than that as soon as the Act came into force, and lots of people were saying, well, actually, this is a bit rubbish. Anyway, the UK government has been playing around with the idea of Gender Recognition Act reform for what feels like literally 1,000 years. The situation is showing no signs of actually being resolved anytime soon. It's now been over a year since the public consultation put out by the Government Equalities Office wrapped up, and the government have in that time not been forthcoming on whether the results will ever be released. However, we wanted to bring this up because something happened at the recent Pink News Awards, which was held at the Speaker's House in Westminster. We believe that this could be quite significant, but it hardly got any mentions in the mainstream press. I wonder why. At the awards, former Women and Equalities Minister Penny Mordaunt heavily hinted that the results of the consultation came out in favour of Gender Recognition Act reform. She did this speech whilst she was accepting the award for Best Politician along with the absent Jess Phillips. Here is a clip of the speech from the ceremony.
And finally, and in particular because of some of the things that have been said tonight, I just want to adopt my role as Chief Morale Officer, as I do in the Royal Navy, and just say a few things which I hope, will provide you with some comfort. One of the privileges of doing this job is you learn many things. And one of the things that I have learned in the 5 years that I was a minister, and in particularly at the GEO, including seeing the GRA consultation through, is that above all else, the great British public are actually collectively very good people indeed. They care about each other. They care about you. They care about us. They want people in this country to thrive. They want people to love and be loved and to be able to live their lives to the full. They are kind. They are pragmatic. They are thoroughly sensible individuals. And I speak as someone who has the advantage over you in that I have seen the results of the GRA consultation. So my advice to politicians is twofold. First, to those of us in the room, we need to work together more. We need to support each other more, whatever our political differences, whatever party we represent, because on these issues, our country needs us to. And secondly, to those politicians who may not be in the room tonight, including my successors, I would say, if you feel after you've listened, if you feel after following the evidence, if you feel after empathising, that to do the right thing, you need to be brave. If you are brave, what you will discover is that there was no need to be. Thank you.
Now, this speech came from an evening that was full of angry speeches about the failures of the government to act on trans issues, as well as references to the rising level of hatred against the trans community in the press. And this included a particularly glorious speech by Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, Dawn Butler, who is pretty fast becoming one of our favourite politicians because she doesn't mince her sweary, passionate words. And we'll provide a link in the description so you can see for yourself. It is our opinion that this is the former Minister for Women and Equalities telling hundreds of LGBT people that the results of the consultation came from a public which is, as she said, good and decent, and as such the results will very much be in our favour. Now, we did reach out to Penny Mordaunt to see if we could get some more details, but of course, we didn't hear anything back from her people. We have previously reported that there's been some confusion in the press concerning if the government was dropping Recognition Act reform. The Mail on Sunday had previously reported from a senior government source, so, that's trustworthy, that Liz Truss, the current Minister for Women and Equalities, had kicked Gender Recognition Act reform into the long grass due to her believing that helping children transition is wrong. They also claimed that Downing Street bully and Brexit-based liar Dominic Cummings was responsible for her being appointed to the post because Cummings believed that she would strangle the issue. We of course reached out to number 10 and racist liar Boris Johnson for some comment on this, as well as perhaps his take on what former Minister Penny Mordaunt said at the Pink News Awards, and also what his views might be on Gender Recognition Act reform. Here is what a Downing Street spokesperson told us. The PM has a long and strong record on LGBT I'm sorry. No, I'll just compose myself. Has a long and strong record on LGBT rights, and he is a proud champion of equality. He has repeatedly been clear that we must do more to ensure that trans rights are protected. Repeatedly, right, okay. That's why we have consulted on potential reforms to the GRA. It is vital that any next steps are carefully considered and have the right backing in order to have a positive impact on the trans community in the UK. The government received more than 100,000 responses to the consultation and met with 140 organisations to ensure concerns were heard from all sides of the debate. We'll set out next steps in due course. Fucking phrase again. So, thinking that this was a bit rubbish, we went on to ask them to provide us with some information about these times when racist liar and Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said we must do more to ensure that trans rights are protected, as they claimed that he had. They responded by saying that he made a number of pledges throughout his leadership campaign, which I will leave you to research. And so we did. And we are yet to find any mention of this whatsoever. The closest we found is that when he said that LGBT rights must be protected, but we have yet to find anything Johnson has said about trans issues specifically, apart from that one occasion when he was still writing for The Telegraph and suggested that actually police should ignore hate crimes against trans people and spend more time focused on knife crime. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that support there. So I think it's safe to say that as long as Johnson is Prime Minister, contacting the Downing Street press office about anything will be a colossal waste of time. The Prime Minister has lied so many times in his career that we've got no faith in the ability of his government to tell us anything at all. So we also reached out to the current Minister for Women and Equalities, Liz Truss, asking about if the claims made about how Truss got the job were true, what her views were on GRA reform, and what her views were on trans children. And also if she had any thoughts about Penny Mordaunt's Pink News speech and why the results of the consultation have yet to be published, even though the consultation closed over a year ago. In response, the Government Equalities Office gave us more or less the same statement that they sent us the last time we asked, and that we're not even going to bother reading out because we've literally read this to you at least 3 times already in previous episodes. But it basically equates to, and you can probably guess this, you will get the results in due course. I genuinely wish we had better news for you. I really do. But based on all of this, we think it's pretty likely that the results for the consultation are good, but the government is not going to release those anytime soon. So, I mean, Michelle, what do you think's going on here? Why the fuck aren't they just releasing the results?
Because their base is heavily against trans equality. The vast majority of their MPs are against trans equality. According to a Comrades poll that I think we're going to mention in the next news segment, of Conservative MPs, 69% of them have said that they are against self-ID. And yeah, I don't think that this government has anything to gain politically from being on the sides of trans people. And even if they did, looking at the people who are on the cabinet and looking at Liz Truss's history on the subject of trans kids and her previous support for Mumsnet and turfism in general, and this is me completely tinfoil hat, that they want to look like they are trans inclusive without actually doing anything about it, and if anything, stepping things back. because they could come out today and say, we're 100% putting this in the long grass. This could be from a named source instead of some unnamed government source. But they're not going to do that. They don't want to look like they hate trans people, but also they definitely don't want to help us. And at the very least, the vast majority of the party probably want to roll back the rights that we do have. So, yeah. But also, the thing that really fucking got my goat about talking to the press office at Downing Street was they were like, we invite you to do your own research into looking for positive press of Boris Johnson. And it's like, well, that's your fucking job.
Yeah, literally, that is what you are there for.
Why are you leaving it to us to look for good news about your fucking guy? I love the assumption that we didn't look into this before we emailed them.
Yeah, that's...
And I looked into it again after, and I'm still yet to see him on the campaign trail or anywhere say that trans rights need to be protected. And if the press office are lying, and, well, they could be right, but we haven't found it, but, you know, if he said it under his breath in a hallway somewhere, we're not going to find it.
Yeah.
That was a perfect opportunity for his press office to be like, right, here's
Damage control.
X, Y, Z, where this happened, and we would have said, oh, to be fair, Boris Johnson said this. He's a racist liar and a homophobe and a transphobe in general based on some things, but also he has done this. Maybe they were afraid that we were going to make the claim that he is not to be trusted and he flip-flops wherever the wind goes. But then they failed at that because I just fucking said it.
Yeah, we are absolutely making that claim. So, fucking die mad about it, Downing Street.
Yeah, I think we're not just going to not bother getting statements from number 10 as long as he's Prime Minister.
Pretty much. I mean, in fairness, I'm not sure they were that much use when he wasn't. Anyway, moving on, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to move on to the next thing that has transpired in the last 24 hours at time of recording.
Yes.
So yeah, on the 29th of October, which was yesterday at the time of recording, Parliament finally settled on the next chapter in the never-ending Brexit bullshit by voting for a general election, as to finally put the subject of Brexit to bed. Polling day will be on the 12th of December. This means that the UK will have had 3 general elections in the last 5 years, which is a totally normal amount of elections for a country to have. Obviously, the campaigning has only just begun in the last 24 hours, but we wanted to outline how we feel about this. Basically, as we have now talked about for maybe 50 odd hours over the course of this podcast's existence, me and Ashley are staunchly anti-conservative personally.
We might have mentioned that.
Yeah, we may have mentioned that a lot, but we also believe that a Conservative government would be a disaster for trans and non-binary people. To start with, Boris Johnson is a racist liar, and it is official policy on the show to always say his name with the prefix of racist liar, because he absolutely is, and he cannot be trusted to look out for the interests of the general public in general, especially transgender and non-binary people. He has proved this multiple times during his short stint as Prime Minister, as he has made abundantly clear with his attempts to close down Parliament and his irresponsible labelling of Parliament as not fit for purpose, which is totally what fascists say, but anyway.
I mean, yeah.
He has also made it clear that he wants a kind of Brexit that would be incredibly dangerous to the health and well-being of the people of this country, and as trans and non-binary people are some of the most vulnerable people in the UK today, it is safe to say that our community would suffer considerably under any Brexit, let alone a no-deal Brexit, which would result in our international trade rules changing overnight and would result in total and utter economic chaos, even in the best of circumstances.
Yeah.
But more specifically for trans issues, The Times and others recently reported that Number 10 has been polling culture war issues, and these include transgender equality, to see whether they could be used against Labour in the upcoming election. This is the claim that Downing Street has denied, but the claim apparently came from a Downing Street insider, so who the hell knows if this is true? But what is absolutely true is that there has been a number of opinion pieces in The Spectator and The Telegraph which have said that the Conservative Party would be wise to utilise trans issues as a wedge in marginal seats. Whether this is the case or not, according to a Comres poll of MPs, only 9% of current Tory MPs support Gender Recognition Act reform, while 69% are heavily opposed. As such, it is clear that the Conservative Party is opposed to transgender equality. Their current leader is a racist pig-faced fucker, and if you are a trans or non-binary person who votes Conservative, you are literally voting against yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But another aspect to this election is the rising power of the Brexit Party. Over the last few weeks, me and Sophie actually have been digging into this party because we believe that they will probably win a couple of seats in the House of Parliament during this election. And so we tried to get to the bottom of what their policies are. Our work has only just begun on this, but so far the Brexit Party is terrified because they haven't actually announced any policies other than Brexit. There have been plenty of members talking about what they would like to be policy, but the scary thing is that the Brexit Party is not made up like other political parties. Their organisational structure has more in common with a private business than a political organisation, and all the power resides with racist newt-faced bastard Nigel Farage. With all the other major political parties, its members have a say in what the policies are by various means, and they all vote for their leadership in democratic elections amongst its members. This is not the case with the Brexit Party. They are the party of Nigel Farage. His word is king, and the fact that they managed to gain the majority of UK seats in the recent European elections without any kind of manifesto should be of huge concern. Now, I'm not saying this to scare you. Fear is a waste of time, but we don't want to hold back either. This election could be the most important election of our lives, and that isn't hyperbole. There's a lot riding on this one, and it comes at a turning point for trans rights in the UK and the future of the UK in general. So, and we mean this more now than ever before, go and campaign for your party of choice. We do not want to tell you who to vote for, but we will tell you who not to vote for, and we would encourage you to go out and campaign for your party of choice now more than ever. Please do not vote Conservative or Brexit Party or DUP, but do go out and campaign for Labour, for the Liberal Democrats, for the SNPs, the Greens, or anyone but. All of these parties have huge problems. Anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is a real concern. The Liberal Democrats had a hand in bringing the austerity policies that hurt so many of us, and have also proved recently that homophobia is not a deal breaker when it comes to shoring up support in Parliament. The SNPs and the Greens have both had issues with TERFs in their ranks, but overall this is about working out who is the least evil based on your views and outlooks, and it is safe to say that the Conservative Party, the Brexit Party and the DUP would be the far, far bigger evil. So Ashley, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, like you kind of don't want to say, hey, don't do this, don't do that. We don't want to be prescriptive and demand that people do things, but at the same time, literally, if you're a trans or a non-binary person who votes for Conservative or the Brexit Party, you're literally voting for your own demise. And I don't understand the people that would do that. I am aware of, if not exactly friends with, some trans people who do indeed support the Conservatives, but surprisingly, they're all kind of white and privileged and did quite well out of in career terms before deciding to transition. So, maybe that's part of it. Just saying, privileges playing a certain amount of playing a part here. Also, like with the Brexit Party specifically, I am kind of hoping this goes the way that it sometimes does with music, with bands, where it's like the lead singer's like, okay, screw this, I'm off and I'm going to form my own band, and then it just sinks without a trace. And I'm kind of hoping that's what happens to Nigel Farage. Is it Farage or Farage? I don't know. Yeah, you kind of hope it sinks without a trace. Unfortunately, I don't think it will. It's also interesting to note that I think yesterday Labour brought a motion to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, which was achieved with the Scottish referendum. And also, within the Conservative Party leadership? Well, no, I'm not going to correct that. Within the Conservative Party leadership elections, members of the Conservative Party who were 15 and above were permitted to vote. So it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating to me that they are A-OK with letting people who are under 16 vote when they know they're going to be voting Conservative, but they're not prepared to do that when it comes to actually allowing people to vote for any other party. Bearing in mind, 16-year-olds can join the army, are starting to pay national insurance, and are participating in public life on the same level as quite a lot of adults. I absolutely do think that 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote, given that this election and all of the things that are going to stem from it are going to affect them far more than some 70-odd-year-old racist from Stoughton-on-the-Wold or whatever. So, interesting times.
And the thing is, 16-year-olds today are so much smarter than I was when I was 16 because,
Right?
the internet wasn't as pervasive, the knowledge wasn't always at your fingertips. My phone had 16 colours, the kids now, you talk to them and it's like, yeah, okay, you've earned a say. Maybe at one point, a 16-year-old may not be able to understand the things that are out there because they may not have the access to the information, but the kids do now. The kids grow up a lot sooner than they used to. It's definitely an argument that they should be allowed to vote now. And, it's fairly obvious why the Conservatives are against the idea. It's because there would suddenly be millions more Labour voters.
Pretty much. Well, it might not even be Labour. It just won't be Conservative, it seems.
Yeah, it'll be generally left parties. I think the Greens would get a significant boost, especially based on the work that Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion have been doing. The youth are way into that. And, obviously
as they should be,
because,
frankly.
Yeah. They're going to be the ones that, whilst you and me, Ashley, are, old and decrepit living under a bridge somewhere, they're going to be the ones starting, new townships in the post-apocalypse. So, they should have a say right fucking now.
Yeah, agreed. So, the election's the 12th of December, isn't it? So, and I'm sure you're seeing literally everybody on your social media saying this to you already, but for God's sake, register to vote. Have a say. We're doing a democracy. People, racist liars who are masquerading as prime ministers are literally trying to thwart our democracy, and I really don't think we should let them.
And also, if you aren't allowed to vote in this one, maybe you are under 18, maybe you are an EU citizen, maybe you are, I don't know, had your vote taken away by bastards in the night, whatever the situation, that doesn't mean you can't get involved. Go join a party and go and campaign for them, because admittedly, you may not be able to vote, but you may be able to convince 8 or 9 people to vote the way you would like them to vote, which is definitely worth it. And you know what, even if you can vote, go join your party and campaign. This is an important one. We can't sit this one out.
Pretty much, yeah. It's too important. Annoyingly, it's basically a single issue election. This, isn't it? We're doing, and there's a lot of talking about how maybe a general election wasn't the way to go so much as like a people's vote on this Brexit quote-unquote deal that has been arranged, but literally this election is going to be entirely about Brexit. Every single other concern in the country, like the NHS, like trans equality, hundreds of other issues have been completely sidelined on the basis of this project, which is going to wipe billions more pounds off of the economy of the UK and bring benefit to only a fairly small group of Etonian pricks who are already far too rich. But this is a big one. Unfortunately, this particular election could well be one of the most important in our lifetime, although let's just see, if the Conservatives win again, it might be the last election we ever have. So wouldn't that be fun?
I am thinking back to all the times that I've heard that, this is the most important election in our lifetimes, and...
Yeah, every time.
I think with this one, there might be more of a claim to it, but it could also be me being caught up in election fever or whatever.
Yeah, indeed. So, yeah, basically, there's an election. Please register to vote. Please don't vote Conservative. And let's try and get these bastards out before they kill any more of us.
120,000 people dead. Just saying. I could have been one of them. Just saying.
Anyway, let's put a pin in that. I'm sure we'll come back to election fun and games over the next few weeks and months and possibly years. And let's boogie on to our next little bit, which is something a little bit more fun.
Yeah, we've got a musical interlude, haven't we?
We do, yeah. So that was a much, much heavier segment of the news than we might have liked. So we have decided to lighten the mood with a musical interlude. There are not very many bands out there that can genuinely make us laugh, but this lot are funny. They're rude, they're passionate, and a real fucking good time, to be honest. So Trigger Warning and the Safe Spaces are a trans and non-binary punk band based in Cardiff, and along with having one of the best band names that I've ever heard, their album Everything is Problematic you can get on their Bandcamp. It's a pay-what-you-want arrangement. The link is, of course, in the description, and the album is an absolute delight. So, here is a song they did about prime turf and double-down transphobe Julie Bindle, and it's called Oh Julie. So take it away, Trigger Warning and the Safe Spaces.
Julie Bindle can't play guitar. She's not very good at playing guitar. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie Bindle can't ride a bike. She's not very good at riding a bike. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie Bindle can't cook a roast. She's not very good at cooking a roast. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie Bindle can't formulate a convincing argument as to why trans women shouldn't be allowed in feminist spaces. Probably 'cause there isn't one. And perpetuating misogyny against trans women is perpetuating misogyny against all women. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie Bindle can't play guitar. She's not very good at playing guitar. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie Bindle can't ride a bike. She's not very good at riding a bike. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie Bindle. Julie Bindle. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie Bindle. Julie Bindle. She's not very good at anything else either. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie, oh Julie Bindle. Julie, oh Julie Bindle.
I get to sound like a real DJ now. So that was Trigger Warning and the Safe Spaces with Oh Julie. Check for links in the description, but you can find the album that song came from on their Bandcamp. Just go on Google and search for Trigger Warning Safe Spaces Bandcamp and you will find it. They also wanted to let you know that they have a gig coming up on the 7th of November in Rugg at the Capitol Centre Cardiff for the launch of the Ellen May Wynne Jones retrospective. Not entirely sure what that is, but Trigger Warning and the Safe Spaces will be there, and you should go and see them because they're great. You can find all the information on that in the description. If you're in the Cardiff area on the 7th, you could do a lot worse. Go support trans and non-binary musicians and one token cis guy.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to have a token cis, haven't you?
Yeah.
So, but yes, so that is Thursday, the 7th of November, which is also the day after my birthday. Isn't that nice?
I had no idea.
So that finishes off the news and our lovely little musical interlude for this particular episode. But now we're going to be getting on to what we've started calling the meat, and it's a little bit different, although it kind of isn't, because every time I do one of these, it's always got so much history in it, and I sort of apologise for that. But hey, I find it interesting.
I always love hearing about history when it comes to queer stuff because, internalized transphobia is the whole thing where you just like, am I a freak? Am I a thing? And then you realise, no, there's been so many people like you before.
Yeah, exactly. There very much has. So, it is of course Halloween. Hopefully, if you're listening to this actually on Halloween, perhaps, then happy Halloween to you. But we thought we would mark the occasion. Not everyone, of course, is a fan of Halloween, and I've got to admit my interest in it has definitely waxed and waned over the years, but overall it's kind of a bit tricky to deny that a lot of queer people are really into Halloween, probably for a lot of reasons, and I think in part it's the excuse to wear a costume. I know from my own life that having that excuse can be very, very handy for nervous trans people. No, I'm not a trans, it's a costume that I spent ages on and that I really like, and God, would you look at me in this thing though, as the cogs are slowly turning. If this sounds familiar, believe me, I know how you feel. But since it's Halloween, and mostly since I've been planning this episode for a while, we are going to get just a little bit spoopy. And since I'm far from the only trans person who seems to have developed an interest in this, I thought we might talk about witchcraft. A little while ago, an article that I read set me off thinking about this, and what absolutely didn't help at around about the same time was the painfully suave Oliver Thorne from PhilosophyTube making a video directly about gender, feminism, and witchcraft. Except it absolutely did help, because then I ended up with a reading list and away we went. So, now a point that was raised in that PhilosophyTube video stuck with me, so I went off and read the work that it was drawn from, Caliban and the Witch by Italian philosopher Silvia Federici. Now, to say right off the bat, I do not read very many philosophy books. I studied it for an A-level, but completely fucked up the exams and didn't actually get any grade for it, and didn't then bother reading any philosophy for quite a long time. However, one of the things that Federici talks about that I did understand is that, well, the idea that the witch trials of Europe and America having quite a significant impact on the ultimate disempowerment of women. It certainly wasn't the only thing that had a hand in that, of course, but in ye olde days of yore, women could occupy a role as a wise woman or as a healer, a midwife, within a community, and as such, have a certain status. But the witch trials, for a number of reasons, disencouraged that sort of thing. It's quite easy to see how religious or otherwise patriarchal authorities could feel threatened by an independent woman having a leading role in their communities.
So, wait, like, you're in Sainsbury's or whatever, and you see, like, a costume for, the black, the pointy hat, the green skin and all that. That all came about because, what, powerful women were a thing?
So, let's go back a little bit here, all right? So the idea, as outlined in Federici's book, is the timeline runs a little bit like this. So, at a point hundreds of years ago, feudalism that had existed for a long time in Europe was giving way to something new, something different, something called capitalism, which is, pretty sure that's not what they were calling it at the time. But and in part, this is related to the fact that the Black Death came along and killed literally a third of everybody in Europe. 1 in 3 people were killed by this. And so then the people at the bottom of the pecking order found that they had a certain amount of power. They could then make demands of the people who were above them in the social strata. So resistance to feudalism, people saying, look, this isn't right, this isn't on, was in a lot of cases led by women. So, prominent roles for rebellious women.
And that wasn't looked upon fondly by certain folks.
By people who were trying to take control, that kind of grabbing of resources that took place as capitalism was established, something Federici calls primitive accumulation. Now, at the time, things were quite different. People were religious. People had different beliefs from what we have today. There was a much more widespread belief in things like magic. There was a tremendous amount of social power in this idea, which was linked in with these people within a community who were, healers, midwives, if you wanted somebody to make you feel better about something, to tell your fortune, to help you out with some pain with their specialist knowledge of herbs, then you would go and see a wise woman. You would go and see that person in the community who was known to be that person.
I could definitely see how there's a whole bunch of trans feminine people who are really into this idea. I can see that now.
You can see the logic, can't you? And so, obviously, simply from where I started, from my starting point, right from the get-go, I am coming at this thing from a fairly feminist angle. So, as I mentioned, Caliban and the Witch was very interesting, as was Federici's subsequent book, Witches, Witch Hunting and Women, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Now, the connections between witchcraft and feminism are made extremely explicit in other works. other books more recently, like Kristen Soleil's Witches, Sluts, Feminists, which is an excellent book to ostentatiously read on public transport because no one wants to sit next to you. And Soleil points out that just as witch was a term once used to try and shame and ostracize women, other more overtly misogynistic insults serve rather the same function in today's world. Slut is definitely one of them, albeit reclaimed somewhat as discussed in the book. I'm sure you can think of a few others, so I'm not going to dwell on it. So for our purposes then, what is a witch? What exactly is witchcraft? There's a lot of ways to answer those questions, but for my purposes, it kind of didn't matter. I'm mostly interested in the more social and, I guess, political elements of the witch. Mostly. There's also the mythology, but maybe ask me about that later. Now, as I mentioned, the wise women of yore certainly did exist and seemed to provide a variety of, shall we say, services within local communities, everything from herpology to spiritual questions, and according to Doreen Valiente in the book Witchcraft for Tomorrow, was also a place to get some really lush hallucinogenics from our fungal forest friends, those tasty mushrooms. And with that in mind, it's quite easy to imagine things like visions and astral projection being the result of experiments with hallucinogenics. However, to clarify, please do not fuck about with mushrooms if you don't know what you're doing. In smaller doses, with some of them, you can trip out nicely, but it's quite easy to have too much, and that can literally kill you with certain types. If this is something that interests you, then there are resources out there written by the psychonauts of our time, but please do be careful.
My experiences with magic mushrooms were not at all spiritual. They were mostly based on... because back in my day, they were legal. That's the first thing. I have never bought mushrooms when they were illegal. I went to Middlesbrough on the train and bought them from a market stall. And then I would take them with my friends. We would get very, very drunk. We would eat them. And the nights would result in, well, in one particular case, one of my friends pissing himself twice, bouncing on his own head and eating cigarettes. And that's my history with mushrooms, basically. I always had a great time. I laughed more than I've ever had, whilst everyone around me is vomiting and freaking out.
Yeah.
We weren't taking them for spiritual reasons, but it's interesting to hear that they do have a medicinal, I guess, function.
They certainly used to, and there's even now we occasionally see research from like, oh, well, actually, we found that this compound that's found in a lot of hallucinogenics could actually be helpful for anxiety or depression or whatever. There's a certain amount of this where it was basically pre-scientific medicine, where it had been observed that a particular plant or a particular fungi had a particular effect on the body, and then people started to use it to induce that effect. My own history with mushrooms is a little bit more boring. They don't actually seem to do very much to me, although I did accidentally smuggle home some mushroom tea from Amsterdam once. I had it in my jacket pocket, and I'd forgotten that it was there. I took my jacket off and put it on the metal detector thing because it had metal buttons on it. They thoroughly searched me and my bag, but neglected to search the pockets of the jacket, which I then discovered this packet of mushroom tea in there after I got off the plane back in Manchester. So I was like, whoops, I'm accidentally a smuggler.
That's some serious shit, Ashley. That's you smuggled drugs, Ashley.
That could have accidentally gone in a number of directions. Respectfully, it was mushroom tea, and I drank it later that evening, and it was delicious, but it didn't really do anything that I would have expected it to, in that sense. So, pulling it back a little bit to our spoopy talk. Today, someone who describes themselves as a witch might do tarot cards, or be into astrology, or they might make their own balms and moisturizers, or take a kitchen witch approach and inscribe sigils onto pie crusts, or legit go out and hex Nazis under a full moon. There's so many options. There's even #witches of Instagram, because you kind of have to admit an altar table replete with crystals and smoky incense and jars of mysterious things does look pretty cool. There's a whole aesthetic that I'm sure we're all familiar with, which you've mentioned, pointy hats, black eyeliner, maybe a cat here and there. There's a lot of people who get lots of different things out of a practice. There's a lot of people who get a lot of different things out of the practice of witchcraft in the modern world, be it somebody who is religiously pagan or somebody who is otherwise secular, but perhaps enjoys some light witchcraft amongst friends. Honestly, I'm still not sure where I am in between those two things.
I mean, it's a common joke in my flat where my flatmate says that I am on the road to becoming a crystal healing person. But how strong does the religious belief have to be? Because I myself at this point in time don't believe that crystals can do that much. I mean, they're pretty. I think that aesthetically they could maybe lift someone's mood, maybe, but no more than, say...
Anything else that matches with your aesthetics that you like the look of. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so there's a lot of different answers to that question as well. There are some people who would describe themselves as a witch and are religiously in some way pagan. We'll get on to a little bit more about that a little bit later on. I'm sure lots of people get lots of different things out of it, and I'm sure that there are some people that have an actual belief in, kind of pagan mythology, in the same way that there are some people who have an actual belief that there is a god in the, Abrahamic Christian sense. And I'm sure that there are some people equally that believe that it's all absolutely nonsense, but it's rather good fun. And obviously, at all points in between those two things, I'm sure people would place themselves there too. So
I will say, over like 10 years ago, I went to a pagan wedding and I represented the wind. And that was tremendous fun.
Isn't it? Right?
Yeah, really is.
So it's particularly in sort of Celtic traditional paganry, witchcrafty type stuff, which I've got a certain amount of experience with, but more on that later as well. That's kind of called a hand fasting, and I've witnessed a couple of them as well at like Beltane rituals and so on.
Yeah, they jumped over a broom.
Oh, a broom. Okay, all right.
I'm not sure. They might have this particular couple may have a different, like...
I mean, that's the thing, right? There is no one set way to do it. There's a lot of different traditions that are all broadly under the umbrella of paganism, but equally somebody can describe themselves as a witch and actually, do tarot and practice witchcraft and whatever, without actually then also describing themselves as pagan. But, usually in a lot of bookshops, you'll kind of find those books clustered together in the mind, body, and spirit section. Anyway, so going back to the bit that aesthetic that I mentioned, or collection of aesthetics, I guess, like the fearsome witch with the pointy hat. That image has been used for political purposes for some time now as well, like literally hexing the patriarchy in action. There was a group starting up in the 1960s. Their name was the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, which the acronym for that is witch, which we might say a hell of an acronym. And this marked the birth of the activist coven in mainstream consciousness and media. So as outlined in that book that I mentioned, Witches, Sluts, Feminists, more recently, Satanic Temple member and activist Jex Blackmore has brought a lot of this quite fearsome, satanic, bloody imagery to hit protests against restrictive abortion laws in the US. Just, in case you feel like applying a fun aesthetic to any protest action on bodily autonomy that you might be thinking of.
That is fucking cool. That, there's a history to it. It's shocking. You've got to have a sense of humour in there to do that kind of thing. I am down for that. Mm-hmm. That is cool. Jex Blackmore, you have my respect.
Yeah, look that up, actually, I would say, because it's some genuinely interesting reading on a kind of theoretical basis, but as well as, wow, that is such a striking way to protest. And a lot of the reading that I've been doing has been focused on the idea of witchcraft as a kind of spiritual queer praxis. Now, what does that mean? Well, forgive me if you know this one already, but praxis is simply the process by which a theory or a skill is in some way enacted or embodied. It's applying your theories and abilities in reality. And we see this in society all the time. For example, when a group of any kind raises funds for a particular cause based on their theory or their belief. So a spiritual praxis is perhaps an activity designed to heal your bruised queer mind. Something like baking a cake or taking a walk with a friend. It can literally be anything. A collection of essays called Becoming Dangerous, which features contributions by trans people too, and several other books have spoken about witchcraft in explicitly trans-inclusive and feminist terms, and using it as a way to come together to build community, heal from trauma, challenge institutional violence, and work to dismantle misogyny, which I fucking love, both as a concept and as a wonderful thing to actually be happening. So one of the things that sort of sparked this interest was, as well as the Philosophy Tube video, was the number of people in my life on, say, social media or various other, friends IRL, had expressed some interest in the idea as well. And I think a lot of the current movement of witchcraft and paganism particularly within queer circles, comes in part from queer people who have had negative experience within other religious circles, or feel in some way alienated by modern society, seeking something else to connect to, which is something I can massively empathise with. But then there arises another potential problem. There's a lot of covens and pagan groups out there which, unfortunately, also have straight cis people in them. The same oppressions might find themselves being replicated in new and ostensibly more liberal ways. In my first brush with paganism many years ago, one thing I noticed about some of the traditions, and Wicca in particular, is that the gender binary I've spent most of my life telling to fuck off is replicated in the idea of the god and goddess. Personally, I was turned off Wicca both by its formality as a belief system and also by that gender binary vibe of the underlying mythology.
So, when you're talking, is Wicca a subsection of paganism? And are there any, like, official, like, Christianity, you got the Catholic Church, you got the Methodist Church of England, Islam, you got Sunni, Shia, etc., etc. Like, are there, like, recognised witchy religious sects? I mean, what's the hierarchy here?
Well, I mean, so I think a lot of people would be affronted at the idea that you're thinking of it as in terms of a hierarchy, but I absolutely understand the question. So within Christianity, and as you say, within other religions, there are different sects, different belief systems, and slightly different ways of doing things, all under the same umbrella. And Wicca is a specific and quite codified belief system which exists under the umbrella of paganism. It's taking ideas from pre-Christian mythologies, pre-Christian religions, and saying, okay, we've made this thing which is a whole belief system, you can live your life by it, it's amazing. Now, that in itself is not a problem. I am perfectly okay with that and religious freedom and people doing their own thing. But I think a lot of the people I know who have been turned off Wicca specifically and particularly queer people, have done so because it is so codified and it kind of is replicating some of the things that they may have experienced in other religious spaces and kind of, putting them out there again and saying, oh, no, but this is progressive and mystical. And we're perhaps not totally keen on that. So this first brush with paganism that I mentioned, I was in the University Pagan Society, right?
That is a very you thing to do.
Isn't it? I had a jumper with my name on it and everything. So within that I was interested in the mythology, and I was also interested in meeting all of the pretty people and drinking mead with them, I've got to be honest. But within that there were several people who would describe themselves as, out and out Wiccans, and there were several people who just said, oh, well, I'm just kind of more broadly pagan in a quite eclectic way. There were some people who were quite specifically following traditions based around Norse mythology or Celtic mythology and, any one of a number of other things. And that brings in another question which kind of modern spaces for paganism is still kind of wrestling with, which is the question of cultural appropriation. Is it appropriate for somebody like me who was born and raised in the northwest of England to adopt and take on and kind of worship the gods of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or South America, and kind of adopting that and saying, oh, well, that's me and that's my tradition? And it's like, well, I'm not sure it is. It's fascinating to read about, and it's interesting to see how many different kind of pre-Christian mythologies from all over the world have got similar themes. I'm intensely interested in that and why that is, but that's like the work of a lifetime, that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where the line is, because, I mean, there are people who are born and raised in the UK, which is, Christianity has been the dominant religion here for centuries, although it's on the wane now, thank God. See what I did there?
I do, yes, well done.
But then there are people who are born and raised in this country who turn to Buddhism, who turn to Islam, who turn to Sikhism, and is that cultural appropriation in the same way? Or is putting Wicca and paganism in the same category as those as religions in itself problematic? And
well, now you're asking the questions, right? And that discussion is very definitely still being had within those spaces. And it's like, well, where's the line? Why are we treating paganism and or Wicca differently as a religion than we might treat, Islam or Judaism or Buddhism? But that's that's an interesting side note, I suppose. So
yeah, I think there is something to be said for people who take the stuff of Wicca and paganism, like they basically buy a whole bunch of beads and sort of wear it as a fashion accessory. I think that crosses the line, absolutely. When it comes to genuine belief in the spiritual aspects of it, when you are performing the rituals yourself for your own, like, spiritual,
well-being, shall we say?
Yeah, like, I mean, my ignorant ass would probably say that's fine, but then, you know, I'm coming at this completely as a layperson. I know next to nothing about this particular subject, and if I'm totally full of shit, let me know on the Twitter at @WhatTheTrans and educate my ignorant ass, or if you have the spoons and time and will for it.
Yeah, indeed. We're not demanding that that anybody sort of give out. I mean, you know, honestly, you and I could probably have a conversation about this, because I've kind of been keeping this part of the show and the research that I've been doing for it, like, ring-fenced away from Michelle, simply so she could approach it and ask the questions that she is asking. So, you know, it's as mysterious to her as it might be to you. But, so as I mentioned, Wicca specifically has got within it this idea of a god and goddess, and they're opposites of each other, and the goddess is the moon and the god's the sun, and all this other stuff that you can find with some fairly rudimentary Googling. But I was put off by that when, you know, I was back at university. I was like, well, that's just replicating something that I'm not sure I'm totally keen on. Now, in history, and going all the way back to ancient history, there have been a number of expressions of the concept of a god, or, you know, gods and goddesses or whatever, not necessarily embodying the gender roles that we have subsequently adopted in society. The idea of, you know, a god that could, or a deity rather, which could embody both male and female characteristics has existed literally since the days of ancient Greece. Aphrodite, I have seen portrayed as basically a non-binary god, portrayed as both male and female, and whose followers were described thusly by the Roman historian Herodotus in the Histories. The Enaria, or the men-women, say that they received their prophetic powers from Aphrodite. There were a number of different sects or cults and different gods being worshipped. Each set of believers had their own different ideas about what their god was responsible for and did, and what the worship should consist of. But it's very interesting to me that even back in the days of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, there were people existing outside of the gender binary and expressing that within their religious worship as well. But despite this history, again, some people are desperate to use a religion for petty political purposes. As I've mentioned, Wicca is a thing. Wicca is actually a relatively new thing. It was codified sometime in the 1950s, mostly by a chap called Gerald Gardner, who I have heard described as the creepy uncle of modern paganism. He was anti-LGBTQ and specifically argued against same-sex relationships because reasons. There's a strain of female-centric Wicca called Dianic Wicca, named for the Roman goddess of hunting. This was founded in the 70s by an activist named Zuzana Budapest and has repeatedly excluded trans women, with Budapest going so far as to state in 2011, women are born, not made by men on operating tables. So you see what I mean about replicating old oppressions. And it's slightly disappointing, because I think a lot of people who are involved within, you know, paganism, you know, new spirit or neo-paganism or modern spiritualism, or any one of the dozens of terms that I've heard used to describe this are, you know, so many followers of that. I say, oh, you know, we're so open-minded and it's all this and it's all that. And actually, well, that's not really the case. But then you get kind of, I don't want to say extremists, but you get people at all ends of the spectrum within any group, religious or otherwise. And so there are obviously going to be some people that will simply use their quote-unquote beliefs as justification to exclude the people that they don't like, be that trans or gay or whoever else.
That's an odd one, because it's, I mean, thanks to all of the history of the witch trials and stuff from the hundreds of years ago, the witch burnings and all of that, witch iconography has become sort of a counterculture thing. Paganism and Wicca, I would argue, is a counterculture thing.
I would say
and
so.
Those kind of things will be most attractive to people who are on the outside.
Definitely. Trans
people, non-binary people, and all sorts of people. So the idea that there is non-inclusive angles to this counterculture is incredibly
disappointing,
silly and upsetting. Yeah.
Disappointing would be the. But then, along with, you know, kind of every expression in terms of spirituality and religion, people get a lot out of it as well. You know, so yeah, fine. There's some people exist who are just really, really hateful about it. There, you know, I've heard stories of people get a lot out of it too, even though there are some hateful people who exist. So, like, you know, Budapest and Gardner, and even literally the Nazis. Himmler, during his time at the helm as the head of the SS, was trying to bring in a kind of Germanic neo-paganism, hence all the, the rallies and flames and all the kind of ritualistic stuff that the Nazis tried to convince everybody else to go along with.
That sounds like something out of, those
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Occasional horror movie stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Or, those pulpy horror books about magic Nazis that find a magic scepter that can set people on fire or something.
Yeah, well, it's a thing in Hellboy, isn't it? Project Ragnarok, etc., which then creates Hellboy who's not fond of Nazis, which, there's a lovely irony in there somewhere. But, so this kind of idea of being a bit of a hateful pagan is not new. I saw a wonderful message, it kind of went viral within certain circles where there were people who were like Odinists. So that's, Odin's obviously one of the gods in the Nordic pantheon. Mr. Wednesday, if you watch American Gods. And so a couple from America were like, we want to be handfasted and we want to do it in Ireland, but we don't want the ceremony to be conducted by anybody who believes that same-sex marriage is valid, and we don't want it to be conducted by anybody that believes interracial marriages are valid. And so the Irish Association of Odinists, or whatever it was, wrote back to say, yeah, fuck off, which I found quite delightful. But then, who knows how far that has gone. I'm sure there are some far-right people in this country, in America, who are... neo-fascist. Well, not even neo-fascists. They're just fascists, and they're using neo-paganism as a way to express that in a quote-unquote spiritual way. There's a whole conversation about the Nordic runes, which were a thing that, absolutely existed. Communication, the kind of runes that you see scratched on places, which have been, unfortunately, adopted by members of the far right. And there's whole, markets and events and so on. I've seen pictures of several stalls saying, look, we're not going to sell this stuff to you if you're a Nazi, so sling your hook. But as well as all of this stuff, which is kind of hateful and is replicating a load of stuff from old oppressions and bringing it in, which you see happen in so many different circles, people get a lot out of it as well. In the same with any religion, perhaps sense of inner peace, perhaps. I'm not sure I've ever really had one of those, but this stuff has definitely brought me some community and some new friends and some interesting insights. There's a lot of very, very cool thinking on the subject, should you be interested. And of course, there are books. And there's two I'd like to flag up in particular. There's another collection of essays called Queer Magic, and another book literally called Non-Binary Witchcraft. If you're interested in the idea of witchcraft as a political element, I'd also recommend Googling around for the Yerba Mala Collective. And of course, in this new digital age, there are many, many hundreds of thousands of blog posts. I think my general feeling on this is something akin to be gay, do crime, form a coven.
So when you have a coven, what do you do in the coven? What is the actual practice of this religion culture
thing? I mean, I'm not sure I'm in a coven, because according to several of the books that I've read, to be a coven you have to make it official and do a ritual and initiate people, and we've not done any of that. So I guess it's more of a witchcraft working group. But
I love the idea.
I know,
of
right?
that.
But I think, as I've mentioned, lots of people get lots of different things out of it. So the book that I mentioned earlier on, Becoming Dangerous, which is a collection of essays which has been edited by Katie West and Jasmine Elliott, talk about how different covens do different things. Some of them are quite specifically, we're a coven, we're going to come together, but the main focus of what we do is the political activism, like the original 13 members of Witch back in the 60s. But there are some people that come together who will literally, okay, let's do a ritual. We will cast a circle. We will do a spell for X, Y, and Z, and then we'll close the circle and have a delicious meal together, or whatever. And I think that's fine, honestly. And people get a lot out of that, in the same way that people get something out of going to church and listening to the hymns and whatever else, the sacraments that are given. That kind of feeling of peace and spirituality and connection and everything, which I've heard various religious adherents describe, is not something I've ever experienced in a church, but I absolutely have experienced it in a forest, for example. It's like, this is nice. I like this. I feel connected to this.
See, I had that when I was watching Endgame.
Right.
I mean, I don't think I'm much of a spiritualist, as much as my flatmate seems to think that I'm on that path to becoming like an aromatherapy crystal person.
Why would they think that of you?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I think it's just because, I'm a fairly left-wing person. I think I don't know. Maybe it's because I try to be agnostic in most things when it comes to the spiritual. It's like, I mean, I deep down don't really think that it's much of a thing, but my perspective is a perspective of one. You know what I mean? Like, I can't say for sure, you know? So, and it gives people joy. I don't want to stand in the way of that. Whereas my flatmate is at medical school, very science-based. So, you know, is a little bit more rigid in that. And I wouldn't say that they're necessarily wrong either, in a way. Like, basically, I'm just like, oh, that's what you think? Cool. And that seems to be the path I'm on towards Christendom, apparently.
I think it's worth pointing out that you absolutely can be both, right? So I've met people who work in laboratories or work at university within the kind of maths department or whatever, who are pagan or Wiccan or whatever. So, you know, they're not, I wouldn't say they are mutually exclusive.
Well, no, there are many scientists that hold spiritual and religious views, you know. There are scientists who are Christians, there are scientists who are Muslims. Hell, like, didn't Muslims, like, invent maths? Isn't that a thing that, like, they did, like, 1,500 years ago or something?
And the concept of zero, which was terrifying to, you know, Christian authorities at the time.
I mean, the idea of nothing and zero terrifies me now.
Yeah, I mean, but that's just normal existential despair. Everybody in the UK's got that at the moment.
Yeah, true. But yeah, like, you know, I didn't mean to say that isn't possible. It's just, I don't know. If somebody came up to me and said, I believe that an amethyst cured my arthritis, I'd be
You'd
like...
be a bit sceptical.
Well, I would probably be a little bit sceptical, but I'd just also be a bit like, well, all right.
Okay.
There's probably another explanation for it, but, you know, whatever. Although, there is an interesting thing. I probably talked about this before, but one of my favourite books is, and I can't even remember the name of it at this point. It's completely slipped from my head. But anyway, it's by a man called Andrew Solomon, and he it's about depression. And he wrote about how there was a woman who came up to him, and she said that she had found a cure for depression, which was literally just knitting things.
Right.
And that she was surprised that he was not going around the world and saying that this was the big old cure for depression. And obviously, from a purely scientific perspective, knitting on its own as a thing does not cure depression.
Probably not.
But it did help hers.
Yes.
And because depression is, in his words, a disease of the mind, that is just as valid. That is just as valid as an antidepressant or a... I can now see why my flatmate thinks I may be becoming a crystal person at some point. This is the wedge, isn't it? This is how it happens.
It's the thin end of the wedge. Yeah, no, don't worry. We'll have you in the witchcraft working group before too long, I'm sure. No.
Yeah, but there is something to this, right? Like that there are some things that do help, like even if just placebo.
Well, and so a lot of what people talk about in terms of, I think that really helped. Well, you know, it's probably the placebo effect. That's the entire basis on which homeopathy works, or indeed doesn't work, because it's bollocks.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that Wicca and paganism is a lot cheaper than homeopathy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You literally just need to go to the herb section in the supermarket and go, okay, that one, and that one. And I am pretty sure, I am almost certain, in fact, I'm pretty damn certain that the stuff that you do in terms of, I'll do a spell by anointing a candle with herbs and then burning it, whatever, I am pretty sure that is not actually having any external observable influence. However, I don't think that's the point. I think particularly in, you know, kind of modern, you know, in the modern world where everything can be so harsh and alienating and so on, anything that you might need to get you through the day, anything that you need to connect to, and whether that's, you know, hanging out and playing Call of Duty all day with your friends, or hanging out and taking a nice walk and then making a lovely pie and doing a bit of a ritual thing with your friends. But both of those things are valid if it's what gets you through, if it helps you to connect, and the sort of conversations that you have about it. You may or may not be approaching it from a spiritual perspective, and either one is fine.
Yeah, there's that famous joke by George Carlin where he says that he worships the god of Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
That brings him relief because he knows that, you know, if he's got a problem, he can call Joe and Joe will fix it.
He'll sort it right out. Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. And I think, so a good example of this is something like tarot cards, right? So tarot cards, the concept of which has existed for quite a long time, but the more, you know, the 72 card deck that currently exists, which is usually referred to as the Rider-Waite tarot deck, is part of an interesting footnote in feminist history in that sense itself, because it's apparently conceived by A.E. Waite, but then the actual designs were done by a woman by a woman called Pamela Coleman Smith, who you tend to not hear so very much about, even though she was absolutely instrumental in the creation of it, both of whom were members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which in the early 20th century was basically an occult organisation in the UK. And they did ceremonial magic. They got dressed up and they, said the old words and so on. And so these two people worked together and created the tarot deck and codified the meanings behind each of the cards and so on. So it might be that you go to someone and who does tarot cards and they say, oh, well, it's this card, and this card. And it's not necessarily, well, it's almost certainly not telling you your future, but sometimes it can tell you what you are worried about.
Yeah, because I remember you did tarot on me when I came up north to see you one time, and it reminded me of some CBT I've had. Like, I've had a whole bunch of different therapies, and it reminded me of CBT because it's, I think most of the people listening will have, the trans community has astonishingly high rates of mental health issues, but it reminded me so much of some CBT stuff I've done, because a lot of the CBT stuff is about challenging core values, bringing them to the fore, and stuff that is just like the basis of where all your thoughts come from. And I found myself during that looking to interpret how the meaning of the cards would relate to me. I was sort of doing CBT through it.
Right.
And it's not a replacement for CBT. I'm going to put myself on the line here and say I don't think it's as good or as effective. And if you are in trouble, CBT with a trained professional is probably the preferable way to go, rather than going to Waterstones and buying a pack of cards.
Yeah.
But there is something too that I can see how that developed and gave people a new perspective on things, because of it. Even if you don't believe in any of the spiritual stuff, it is basically just thinking.
Basically, thinking in a particular direction prompted by whatever's on the cards and whatever it's supposed to mean. And I think that's interesting because usually, because sometimes it can make you aware of something that you weren't aware of before. It's like, oh, so, you get the tarot card out and you get, say, a particular card with a particular meaning, and the first thing you think of, that connection that you make, can sometimes be like, wow, I didn't realize I was worried about that. Maybe I should consider that a little bit more. That's an interesting perspective. And that's not necessarily, as you say, almost certainly not in a spiritual sort of a way. It's just in I hadn't thought of that. And that's fine too, honestly. So one of the essays in the book that I mentioned, Becoming Dangerous, was written by a trans person who had kind of developed an interest in paganism and so on during teenage years at an all-boys boarding school. Part of it was kind of finding something to cling on to identify with. Part of it was a kind of desperation. Like, I'm a girl, and yet I'm at this all-boys school, and everyone's calling me a boy, and my body doesn't feel right. Maybe something can fix this. Maybe anything can fix this, and you grab at straws, and you grab for anything that you can, and maybe you grab for something that seems slightly magical, something that seems like it couldn't possibly work, but hey, you never know, maybe it might. Maybe if I perform the right spell or something, I'll wake up with the right body and whatever else. You can absolutely see where that comes from, and not just for trans people, for gay people more broadly. There's actually a book called Gay Witchcraft, which was published, I forget when, I've not read it, but I'm aware of it, which is focused on, the strapline of it is empowering the tribe. And it's, it's quite gay male centric, I'm told, but within that as a concept, it's like, kind of claim your own power, claim kind of these actions that you do for yourself to improve your lot. And there are a lot of concepts in religion and philosophy and in politics and whatever else that will kind of take you down the same direction. It's a fascinating thing, and I'm interested in exploring all of the, not all of them, but, interested in exploring a number of the concepts and whatever else. And it's particularly fun to do it at this point because I have heard the the current anti-trans crusade in a lot of the UK press being described as a witch hunt, which, has got a certain amount of accuracy to it, I feel, although that's not to denigrate.
Oh, do you mean trans people witch hunting TERFs, or is it the other way around?
Well, I've heard TERFs saying that trans people are witch hunting TERFs, and I've also heard conservatives saying that, we're being witch hunted by everybody. And it's really interesting when male, guys who are conservatives say that, and it's like, because there actually isn't a phrase you're using the term witch hunt, which was a thing where a load of people like you killed a load of women, and then you're reversing that because there actually isn't an equivalent phrase for men, to sort of sum up that persecution. But this is not to kind of denigrate or downplay the effect of the witch trials in Europe and America. It's roughly between the 15th century and about 1730, an unknown number of people were executed. Some of them were tortured. The best estimates that you can get are somewhere between 60 and 100,000 people were murdered, burned at the stake and whatever. The majority of them were women, but there are records that there were men who were executed or burned at the stake or tortured because they were men who enjoyed the company of other men. So right from the get-go, this whole concept of a witch hunt is one that is kind of anti-woman and anti-LGBTQ.
That's really interesting.
Isn't it? And we still use so much of this terminology today. So many of the things, like, when I've said at the beginning of the segment that my interest has waxed and waned, that's the phrase we use when we're talking about the moon. There's a lot of cultural impact of the witch, and I can absolutely see and absolutely understand, and I'm totally on board with people that would choose to associate with that title specifically because of its subversive and countercultural meanings. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Woo! Yeah. So it's interesting, and a lot of people get a lot out of it. We'll do a reading list. We'll absolutely do a reading list. So, yes, I find it fascinating, and since we are at that time of the year, I thought we might talk about it. And it's worth pointing out that if you are listening to this on the evening of Halloween 2019, although quite why you'd be doing that, I'm not sure. Go out and have fun. But, if you're listening to this on the evening of the 31st of October 2019, then at this very moment, I am with my friends doing some light witchcraft. So, enjoy that as an image.
And I will be probably playing Call of Duty.
Nice. Or Sea of Thieves. We could do that, couldn't we?
Oh, we should do I don't know if you do seances or rituals of some kind in Sea of Thieves.
Oh yeah, indeed. That's mostly bad.
For people who don't know, Sea of Thieves is a video game where me and Ashley pretend to be pirates. It's pretty great. Yeah. But yeah, we could totally do some kind of Coven-related Sea of Thieves thing. Witch pirates. Wait, that's a new movie universe we could make.
Witch pirate. I am so up for this. If anybody
fucking pirates.
If anybody wants to do a webcomic that is basically feminist witch pirates, fucking hit me up, mate, because I am so up for that. So yes, but I think what I like about it and what's drawn me to it, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that there's an emphasis on looking after each other. Looking after your coven, your friends, your community. There is so much of an emphasis on taking care of each other in whatever way is necessary. And I think that's something that a lot of people, and even a lot of religious people, need to remember.
Yeah, and if you know any people who are into the pagan Wicca stuff and that isn't your bag, don't be a dick about it. I've seen that a few times, people talking about how much they like a thing, and then somebody comes in and saying
yeah, but it's all bollocks, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just fuck off.
Let people enjoy things.
Let them do their thing. We're all gonna die, Let's all have a good time while we're here.
Pretty much. So, and I think that more or less wraps it up. So, yeah, thanks for listening. Thank you for indulging me, Michelle, and letting me do the thing.
Oh, thank you for educating me on this thing. It sounds fascinating. I would be very up for joining you at one of your spiritual
It's not even things. That. We just do mindfulness with incense, and then we get drunk.
I like those things.
But, yes, so to all of you listening, Happy Halloween, or Happy Samhain, or Happy Samhain. There's still a massive amount of argument over how that word is pronounced, but that is the Celtic pagan old word for Halloween is Samhain. So happy that.
And if you're like me, and just in it for the sweets and the chocolate, enjoy the sweets and the chocolate. So yeah, that was the show. And if you like this, you will love our social media, that thing that you do every day that ruins your day. You can find us on Twitter at WhatTheTrans. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/WhatTheTrans. You can find us on Tumblr, whatthetranspod.tumblr.com. And get in touch. Let us know what you think of the show. If we said anything you don't like, let us know. We'll have a chat about it. We will listen. If we said something you really like, let us know. And, boost our egos a little bit.
I also can't believe I've just spoken about witchcraft for 40 minutes and I didn't even quote any Shakespeare. Shame on me.
Well, didn't he paint the witches in that as evil?
He did, yeah. And that's again, counterculture, shaming, denigrating women. There's a whole thing we could talk about that, but ask somebody who knows way more about Shakespeare than me. Anyway, thank you all for listening. Check us out on the social media, and we will see you in 2 of your Earth weeks.
See you soon. Stonewall haven't split. Bye.
Be gay, do crime, form a coven. Bye!